Even in school, man, they be stressing me about grades and shit. I don't mind, because when I fail, I'm gonna be a gangster. I got street cred, that's what's up. Because I'm a bad boy. Yeah, I'm a bad boy.
We appreciate you taking time to join us today to participate and discuss the content and relevant topic of masculinities and HIV/AIDS in South African higher education institutions, and we really hope that you find the program fruitful and engaging.
So Haiku is based in the Transformation Office, and I think that when we talk about transformation, we're certainly situating gender and masculinities and femininities and debating notions of that and checking what current students feel about these issues in a very contemporary setting. So we have to be very, very sure that we're always hearing such a wide range of voices, and that we as an institution are being responsive to issues around power and how they play out in students' lives, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. So we have to keep this issue on the agenda and check that the group who are discussing it are very broad and contemporary. Is we wanted to bring together stakeholders at the university, so researchers, people who develop the curricula, people who work in the co-curricular area, and look at how should a higher education institution respond to masculinities with all its intersections around race and class and age and sexual orientation and issues like violence and HIV. And so that we can have a curriculum that is responsive to the issues of society. And so we came together to discuss the issues, and then what does it mean for our research agendas and for our curriculum areas, that we could learn from each other and understand some good examples of curricula that had already been developed and used, and people could contribute to that, and so therefore widen the reach of those curriculum areas.
So Raewyn Connell, one of the leading figures of masculinity studies, has described masculinity as a pattern of practice. For her, masculinity cannot be boiled down to a set of ideas or a particular mix of hormones in the blood, but primarily is what you do. Masculinity is what you do in the world. And of course what we do can be quite complicated. So when the men from Kululeka talked about how they had previously avoided getting tested for HIV and then avoided seeking treatment when they were tested positive, they said they were practicing masculinity. They were being men, right? And that's a kind of conventional story about being men and not seeking treatment. Equally, however, when they went into treatment, they joined the support group and they came weekly and they stayed adherent, they were also practicing their masculinity. Right? This is what they said, that they were being responsible to ensure that they could provide for their families. And equally again, when they came to support group meetings and talked about their drinking the weekend before and their continuing unsafe sexual practices, they also understood that as part of being a man. Right? So all these things were kind of framed as part of their masculinity. So practices of masculinity clearly are quite complicated. We also know that masculinity is different in different places. Gender is socially constructed and daily performed. In some ways, the masculinity of Kululeka members was very familiar to me, even coming from a US context. The kind of basic model of masculinity was familiar. But of course, in other ways, like when one of the members grabbed my hand and we walked down the street, I knew that I was in a different place, because that wouldn't happen in the States. So yes, culture matters also, quite an important aspect of masculinity. Of course, one of the big ideas from the study, the field of kind of masculinity studies, is the idea of a plurality of masculinities, right? There are many masculinities, not just one masculinity.
Physical intimate partner violence, highly prevalent in South Africa. A third of women reported victimisation. Almost all of those women had reported multiple episodes of victimisation, and 13% had reported it in the past year. That's from Gauteng. And between 43 and 50% of men had reported lifetime intimate partner physical violence, with about 10% having done it in the past year. So we see quite close concordance between reports from men and women, which is a good thing because that makes us sort of have a better grasp on the validity of the findings we're looking at. And I think now that although we always say when we measure gender-based violence we have to be careful about underreporting, we are increasingly getting evidence from research with men and women that is coming in quite close. And if anything, we do see a slight over-report, a higher level of reporting of violence perpetrated by men than women report. So we're increasingly getting a handle on, you know, what it is that we're dealing with. And I think that for the purposes of being able to develop interventions, I think we have quite robust data now. And we certainly would argue that we know enough about the size of the problem to start dealing with it. Well, I think, first of all, it's clear that men's use of violence has very important impact on women's health, women's risk of HIV and experience of HIV. And men's use of violence against women tracks with men's antisocial and sexually risky practices.
So Chris Colvin also chaired a panel around circumcision and the intersection of masculinities, and particularly the ethical factors involved in higher education institutions partnering with the Department of Health to provide circumcision through student wellness services, and what sorts of theories were then being drawn on in order to deliver a healthcare service. So where I think circumcision intersects with healthcare issues, cultural issues, and the role of the state in people's lives. So some of the keynote speakers that I thought were really interesting, Jane Bennett from the African Gender Institute spoke about using the idea of two gay men's Zulu wedding, and how when she taught it to students it raised a whole lot of intersectional issues about what they had previously thought about black people and about culture and about gay people. My colleague Stella Kiabura-Mokoz and I taught about a man who talked about apologizing to a woman for rape, and what did that mean to be aware of what he'd done to this woman's life.
Okay, so Haiku was involved in developing a curriculum for art students, both in first and third year, and at the conference we presented the outcome of the project. So what we did, and the objective of the course with the first and third year students, we got them to engage with the concept of masculinity through art as a medium. So we gave input lectures for the students around different areas of masculinity and how this notion of masculinity puts people at risk for HIV infection and HIV transmission. So some of the students chose to specifically highlight what kinds of masculinity exists on campus, and wanting students to engage with the piece. So when students walked past on the campus looking at these icons, students stopped and asked, what does this mean and how does this relate to HIV? So at that point, students were able to educate other students about, if we understand the notions of masculinity, we will be able to understand how these notions place one or individuals at risk for HIV transmission. Every year we have a new intake of first year students, and as we know, all students come from different backgrounds, so it's important for us to start engaging with the students already from first year, to start thinking about these notions. And so every year we would need to be working with these students and building on their ideas. So by the time they get to a third year and a postgraduate level, that they're even thinking more about these ideas and more seriously in their artworks, or maybe taking up their role as social commentators more seriously. Haiku has been instrumental in working with Michaela School of Fine Art and in particular Fabian Sapto for developing this model, and now we've run it for a number of years and we have an idea of what the model looks like and what are the outcomes of the model and how the students can move in their own thinking. So it would be important for us to continue working with Michaelis and developing and refining this model and working with new cohorts of students as they come in.
So it's not just about hosting a seminar around masculinity and bringing together role players at one time. It's about taking a snapshot of where the different stakeholders are, those researchers and curriculum educators and people who do co-curriculum and social responsiveness, and re-energizing them and inspiring them to carry on teaching that curriculum and continuing to map what they end up doing, but also that we meet again, and even if they're different people doing it, and again, so that it's definitely an ongoing resource where people can find like-minded people to keep them inspired, because this work is so important. In order to sustain this project, we've actually engaged not only in delivering the curriculum, but in training lecturers and tutors, so that not only can these kinds of courses continue, but that we're training them in a way where they can also create new courses and where we can be a resource for them to bounce off ideas and introduce new ideas in the same kinds of areas, in the broad area of gender, but be relevant to very specific things that are happening around us locally.